Yeah, I like the way you bring in certain things that are in like kind of marketing theory and just broader business theory. There's something I want to come onto in a bit, which is a completely different type of theory, which you talk about within this white paper, which I find fascinating and a very interesting part of it. But let's just go back to the reason why this is important. Okay, so why should organizations be concerned with services?
Let me zoom way out. I'll give you my 50,000 foot view, and then steer me in the right direction.
Okay.
I have a habit of going off on too random tangents.
I love a tangent. Love a tangent.
So I'm going to go way, way back here. But according to like the ancient historians, we basically spent 10,000 years up until the sort of medieval period working the farms. Everything's revolves around farmland, etc. You get into the medieval period, and you start seeing like the emergence of trades that support local food production.
So you've gone from subsistence to more broader society-based agriculture trades.
Yeah, but still, up until the start of the Industrial Revolution, it still revolves around really a subsistence economy. A feudal economy. We have a small subsection of society which controls most of the land, and then the majority of the people either work in the land or providing goods and services which support the work on the land, until you get the invention of like steam technologies, and that starts to obviously to take off, and you start seeing, rather than small scale production, which your butchers, bakers, candlestick makers sort of thing, where production's heavily localized and supports local production, you start seeing the centralization of a lot of production because of the capital intensity required for that production. So you start seeing the emergence of factories, people start moving into the cities, and you see this explosion in the size of cities, but also the population density of urban areas. And then you get the emergence of coal, and then later oil. And so what you see in terms of businesses is sort of mass centralization, to the extent that Ford in the 1920s was so vertically integrated that he owned his own coal mines, he owned his own railroad, he owned freighters that were literally bringing coal up Lake Erie. So I mean, the most centralized possible. He owned the entire supply chain.
That's crazy when you think of it now, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you see sort of as we get through the 20th century, and you kind of move from the industrial economy into the knowledge economy, where computing power becomes more important. You start seeing that centralization sort of move away, and you get, especially in the 80s, you start seeing the emergence of mass outsourcing, but also offshoring.
Yeah.
And technology enables that work to be done more and more outside the firm. The size of the firm shrinks, and so you get from someone like who's a good example, General Motors. They had at one point 300,000 employees. Compare that to Tesla today has about 70,000, and Facebook I think has got something like 40,000-50,000, but double or triple the market cap. So really what you're seeing is a sort of decentralization of the means of production, going into not just smaller and smaller scale firms that can specialize in certain activity, but increasingly now even individuals, which is so you can get work done in a more fragmented way. And so what this means now is you get a move from the majority of GDP coming from the production of goods to now, in the UK and the US, we're about 80% now coming from services. But the challenge is, as I was saying earlier on, a lot of the best practices and a lot of the kind of value-add methodologies, Keiretsu, Lean, Six Sigma, coming out of Toyota and Motorola, they're heavily focused around manufacture of goods, because that's where most of the economic value is coming from. Whereas today, we're outsourcing more and more and more. 4/5 of the economy in the UK, at least, coming from services. We've got to realize that there is a value gap and there's a productivity gap in services that doesn't necessarily exist with goods. And yet we've got these organizations that are becoming more and more extended, and more work is being done outside the firm with specialists that are outside of the walls of the firm. They're not necessarily it's not just that they're not employees. They could be third parties, subcontractors of third parties, etc. And so the supply chain is getting longer and longer and more complex, not just in terms of raw materials to finished products, but raw services, if you like, to work being done the firm cares about.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's risk and complexity in that, and it's a tremendous amount of value on the table that at the moment I don't think we're taking advantage of. So like McKinsey did a study in 2016, 17, I think it was, where they estimated there's about $1 trillion of value in the Fortune 500 left on the table because of poor contract performance management. And so when you look at,
and that's going to be a large portion of that's going to be services.
Oh yeah, in fact, I think in their study, almost all of what they were talking about there was outsourced services. So you've got just a tremendous amount of value. I think it was 8-9% of their total service spend, they believe, is kind of left on the table because you haven't got the right kind of contract parameters within the agreement. You haven't got the right KPIs in place, etc. And so this kind of leads on to where I was going with the white paper. Is often we're outsourcing non-core functions within the firm.
Yeah.
To specialists that know how to do it properly. We don't have the right contract, not even the right contract terms, the right philosophy and governance around the contract that enables them to do that work, to produce the results we're looking for, the outcomes as opposed to outputs that are enabled by letting organizations do the work the way they know how to do best. So in Kate Fantastic's terminology, it's determining what, not how, if you like. So that's kind of where I was going with this. Is how do we incentivize the innovation that bridges that gap to that 9%? So